We're just 2 days away from what President Trump is calling Liberation Day, when he's set to impose very sweeping new tariffs on U.S. trading partners. And neighboring Canada, already reeling from 25% tariffs on its steel, aluminum, and auto industries, is vowing to retaliate. Joining us now is Andrew Furey, the Premier of the Canadian province of Newfoundland and Labrador. Premier, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, how would you like to see Canada respond to yet another round of Trump tariffs?
Well, I think it's important, Wolf, for people and your viewers to understand that Canadians never asked for any of this. We're left often confused, frustrated at times, angered and upset by this round of tariffs. And Canadians, by and large, understand that tariffs are not going to win on the northern border. They're not going to win south of the border. It's going to be a loss-loss situation. So we're very frustrated, very concerned from a macroeconomic perspective, but also from a microeconomic perspective as well. We see this as being and will be incredibly punitive to consumers on both sides of the border. Again, setting up a lose-lose situation. So Canadians are frustrated, they're concerned, but they will be responsive. And I do believe the conversations I've had with the Prime Minister and the United Team Canada front has been strong and firm in recognizing that we do have a position of strength. The economies are integrated for a reason, and it's not just geographic adjacency, it's the shared resources. Canada is plentiful and bountiful in natural resources that can provide the United States manufacturing jobs. It can grow their economy, it can grow our economy jointly together. That's why it's worked so well for so long. But make no mistake, we will be proportional and we'll be responsible and we'll be Canadian in our response.
Yes, Canada's new Prime Minister, as you know, Premier, we're talking about Mark Carney, has blasted the Trump tariffs in very blunt words, saying the close ties between the two countries, in his words, are over. Listen and watch this.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over.
Do you see the relationship between the U.S. and Canada permanently altered? I ask the question because for me, it's really hard to believe how U.S.-Canadian relations have deteriorated. These were the two closest of allies, and now all of a sudden we hear words like this, strong words like this from the new Prime Minister.
So first of all, let me say that Canadians are unpackaging this tariff war in two ways. First of all, there's the economic fiscal issues with respect to tariffs, and albeit I believe that to be illogical. But then there is the blunt language from the President of the United States with respect to our sovereignty, our independence. Canada wants to work with the United States, but we do not want our independence, our sovereignty, our values, our Canadian way of life attacked in any way, shape, or form. And we feel threatened by an imperialistic, expansive agenda by the President of the United States. That said, Wolf, we recognize that this is not every American. In fact, it's likely only a handful of Americans who hold this view. And Canadians are mature enough, they're understanding enough to realize that while we have to have, to steal a hockey analogy, we have to have our elbows up right now in the corners, that hopefully this game and this period will pass and we can rebuild a constructive relationship. I was very encouraged for the first time since the president was elected to hear him refer to our Prime Minister, regardless of political stripe, our Prime Minister, our sovereign head of our country as Prime Minister once again. Since December, he's been referring to that position and that person as governor. And that is insulting and offensive to Canadians.
Governor, because he pretends that Canada is going to be the 51st state of the United States. He used to call Prime Minister Trudeau governor, 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 not premier or prime minister. It's really very, very insulting to Canada indeed. How are Canadians reacting on a personal level to these kinds of comments?
So it's incredibly hurtful. I can speak personally, as a father and who married an American. For me, this is actually very personal. I did some of my surgical training in Baltimore, Maryland. My daughter was born in Baltimore. She's a natural citizen. She could be President of the United States someday. Obviously, I married an American. I have all my children are dual citizens. So it's confusing and hurtful for me as an individual, but Canadians at large are incredibly offended. There is a moment of national unity and pride in the country of Canada that I have not seen in my entire life. And I do think that we are worried about the rhetoric from the President of the United States. But make no mistake, the sovereignty of our independent, proud nation will never be jeopardized. What's confusing, Wolf, is that the relationship has been so strong. I mean, here in Newfoundland and Labrador, we welcomed 10,000 stranded passengers during 9/11. We've fought side by side in 2 world wars in Korea and Afghanistan, and would continue to kind of grow that relationship because it's built on shared values of democracy, of freedom, of independence, and of justice. And to see that being eroded is very troublesome to Canadians.
Yeah. I've always considered Canada to be America's #1 closest NATO ally, and to see this relationship deteriorate as it has over these past few months is really depressing. And as a young boy growing up in Buffalo in Western New York on the border with Canada, I used to go to a lot of Buffalo Sabres hockey games, and before all of the games, not only did they play the U.S. national anthem, they played "O Canada," because almost all of the hockey players were Canadians. And I used to wonder, why are they playing "O Canada" in the United States? And that's what my dad and my friends always explained to me. Canada's, yes, a separate country, but so many of the players are Canadians, and we have to honor them. It was just something I grew up with in Buffalo.
Yeah. It's the most important relationship in the world. It's an example how neighbors can work together, and that doesn't exist throughout the geopolitical context. It has been to date a beacon of hope, a beacon of democracy, the strength of our partnership in protecting not just North America but the world. And I have to believe, Wolf, that we will get through this. And while Canadians are angered and offended, particularly by the attack on our sovereignty, confused and frustrated by the economic issues, but more concerned and by the attack on our independence, I have to believe that once this rhetoric settles, and once rational, logical, mature heads prevail, that the strong historic friendship between the United States and Canada can not only be resolved, but be strengthened.
Global markets are on edge as US President Donald Trump plans to impose sweeping new tariffs Wednesday on America's trading partners. The president claims the levies are needed to strengthen the US economy, but analysts warn his so-called Liberation Day could amount to a major trade war escalation. CNN senior White House reporter Kevin Liptak joins us now live from Washington. And Kevin, as I'm sure you've seen, global stock markets have been falling today as the deadline for Wednesday approaches. There were comments on Sunday from one of Trump's advisors saying that plans for reciprocal tariffs were still fluid. What more are you hearing about plans for this to go ahead on Wednesday as scheduled?
Yeah, I think the watchword today is uncertainty. That's part of what's sending jitters through the financial markets, because even 2 days before this deadline that the president has set to apply these reciprocal tariffs, the scope and the parameters and the specifics of what exactly he's going to do remain unclear. And even behind the scenes, White House officials are still scrambling to finalize some of the details of what exactly the president will put into effect. Yesterday, we heard from the president on Air Force One as he was flying back here to Washington, and he said on the one hand that these tariff rates would be more generous than what many people have been expecting, but then on the other hand, he said that they would apply essentially to every country that does business with the United States. And, you know, dating back the last 6 weeks from the first time that the president identified this date, April 2nd, as the date for his reciprocal tariffs, you have heard a variety of different things. You have heard him say that potentially they will be more generous, easier, more welcome to a lot of these countries than what people have been expecting. But he has also said that these are necessary to realign American trade relationships, and that they will be what he says these dollar for dollar reciprocal tariffs. Essentially, if a country puts a tariff on an American good, he will put the same rate on imports from those countries. And so there is a huge amount of uncertainty about what exactly he will do. And it does appear as if at this moment there is this debate underway, whether he does the dollar for dollar reciprocal tariffs that he's been talking about, or whether the White House applies a universal tariff, perhaps as high as 20%, on all imports into the United States, which would be simpler, but certainly would cause a lot of economic disruption around the globe. What White House officials hope is that this will bring in billions of dollars in new revenue. And we heard from Peter Navarro, who is one of the president's most hawkish trade advisors over the weekend, saying that this plan would bring in $6 trillion in revenue over the next decade, which is an enormous amount of money. If that is actually the math that the White House is looking at here, it would amount to the biggest tax hike since World War II. They hope that it could potentially offset some of the cost of the tax cuts that the president is hoping to put through later this year, but that would be an enormous amount of money. At the end of the day, no matter how these reciprocal tariffs are structured, economists say that Americans and the American consumer will end up bearing the brunt of the costs.